Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and that when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So today we're going to talk about the third day and week 123. Okay, so in my last video, I was talking about the return of Trump 120 weeks after the deal of the century, and I kind of had that a little bit wrong. And so um, I got that from the verses in Genesis where it talks about my spirit shall not strive with man forever because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And so we see that time frame of 120 in scripture a lot. Okay. And so we've been seeing a lot of events happen on key weeks after the deal of the century. And so actually there there was something significant that happened on the 120th week after the deal of the century, but it was not what I was thinking was going to happen, because I thought that was going to be the start of the Civil War in America. But basically, um, what happened is, because it was kind of interesting that the 120th week coincided with the second Passover on the Jewish calendar. Um, and um, so what we saw was on May 15th and 16th was the lunar eclipse, and then May 17th was the start of the 120th week after the deal of the century. Like, if you're counting from Tuesday to Tuesday, the deal of the century happened on January 28th, which was a Tuesday. And so then I've been counting the Tuesdays since then. And so May 17th was a Tuesday. And so actually what happened on that date was, and see, this is, where we see in part and we prophesy in part, is that, sometimes you think you know what's going to happen based on what you see in the scripture, but it's, kind of foggy until the events happen, and then you could look back and see, that prophecy is still being fulfilled. It just wasn't fulfilled the way you thought it was going to be fulfilled. Or the way I thought it was going to be fulfilled, which is kind of what happened. So, but what happened was on the May 17th, that was the day of the primaries in Pennsylvania. Okay. And so, I kind of pay attention to stuff that happens in Pennsylvania because, that seems to be one of the states that's connected to kind of the founding of this nation. And what was interesting is that we had Dr. Oz was running for one of the races in Pennsylvania, and he had Trump support, and he ended up winning. And so actually a lot of people were looking at these primaries on May 17th, because they were looking to see if voters were going to be supporting, were going to be voting for people that were supported by Trump. And actually, a lot of people that were supported by Trump did. There were a lot of wins by the people that were supported by Trump. Okay, or the people, or they were looking at people that believed Trump's lie about the election being stolen from him. So it was a pretty significant date. Okay, so I think with this verse here where God says, my spirit shall not strive with man forever because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. I think, it's kind of like God's way of saying that, okay, well, Trump's not going to be around forever, but we'll see him at 120 weeks after the deal of the century. Okay. Because kind of, it was kind of like the return of Trump, so I wrote here, sort of like the return of Trump. It wasn't the Civil War like I was thinking, that I still believe is coming in America. But, we definitely are seeing, kind of this resurgence of Trump's power and influence, especially with these primaries. You know, um, just how he's able to support people and, um, help people get elected. I mean, it's interesting because, mostly it's helpful for people to have Trump's support, but then there were some elections, some primaries, that people who were supported by Trump, it actually ended up not helping them. But I think in general, I don't know the exact numbers, but in general, it seems like Trump support is helpful for people. And so I realized that based on my last video, I wasn't catching the differences between Acts 1 and Acts 2. And so in Acts 1, we actually see there's, okay, so that's when there's 120 people voting in someone to replace Judas, okay? And, so I think that's a prophetic shadow of these primaries because, the idea is we're wanting to get, or not we, but like, the conservatives are wanting to get people in to get rid of Biden's people. They're wanting to fill, seats with conservatives so that they can kind of take the power back from Biden. Okay. So that's what I think is the prophetic significance of Acts 1. Okay. And then in Acts 2 is where we see Pentecost. Okay. And so I didn't catch the difference. I was kind of running those two chapters together. And so here's Acts 1. And so, so they returned to Jerusalem, a Sabbath day journey, a Sabbath day journey away. Okay. And so I talked about how the Sabbath is the time of Biden because he's the seventh king. Okay. And it's God's taking a rest and allowing evil to just, proliferate during this time. So the fact that like Trump's people are kind of returning is kind of showing, that we're approaching the time of the downfall of Biden. And then, so then it says, at this time, Peter stood up in the midst of the brethren. A gathering of about 120 persons was there together and said, okay, so we need to replace Judas. And and so there's actually kind of a little prophecy about Judas's downfall in verse 18. Now this man acquired a field with the price of his wickedness, and falling headlong he burst open in the middle and his intestines gushed out. Okay, so if you remember in Daniel's statue, the middle of the statue is connected to Obama because it's the brass belly, and so when you see kind of like the middle bursting open in prophecy, it's a picture of the downfall of Obama and Biden. And then okay, and so they talk about in this chapter, so what is this? Peter's saying this, yeah. So Peter's saying, he's actually quoting scripture. He's quoting a psalm where he says, "Let his homestead be made desolate, let no one dwell in it, and let another man take his office." So that's was kind of the motivation of the people in these primaries is trying to move Biden out and trying to move their people in. And so then we see in verse 26, and they drew lots for them, and the lot fell to Matthias, and he was added to the 11 apostles. So drawing lots is a picture of voting. Okay. And then, but I also thought what was really interesting is that on May 4th, which is considered Star Wars Day, because they say, "May the fourth be with you." It's kind of a play on words. So they call that Star Wars Day. We had Biden attacking MAGA on May 4th. Okay. And so actually it was kind of interesting because, like, 3 days in a row. So on May 3rd, we had the Vice President Harris. She was at a pro abortion rally and she made some comment about, in her speech, she talked about the Republican leaders, how dare they, because, she was saying, like, how dare they take away women's rights or whatever. Okay. And so that's what she said on May 3rd. And then on May 4th was when we saw Biden attacking MAGA, which would be, the people connected to Trump, because that's his, that was his campaign, um, cry, make America great again. And so Biden said this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in recent American history, the president said in remarks at the White House. And it's kind of interesting because he got a lot of flack for saying that. Although I think he I think there's some truth to that, because what we're seeing is kind of the MAGA people, the Trump followers, are really kind of becoming far right, just kind of extreme in their beliefs. We kind of lost a more moderate conservative voice in the Republican Party. And then on May 5th, we had Pence at a pro-life rally saying, "Madam Vice President, how dare you?" Okay. And so what I'm wondering is if, we're seeing that on, around Star Wars Day, is we're seeing kind of the start of the war in heaven. And so, here's the verses where we read about war in heaven. And I actually think we've already had war in heaven, was going on during, the election. Okay. That these verses were already fulfilled in the 2020 election. Okay. But then, it's like we're seeing a return to that, especially with, people are looking at November, as a time to really get more conservatives in office, to kind of take away some of Biden's power. Okay, and so in Revelation 12, we read, "And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon." So Michael and his angels will be Trump and his followers waging war with the dragon, with Biden or Obama, Biden/Obama. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven, and the great dragon was thrown down. So in November of 2020, originally the great dragon that got thrown down was, I guess it was Biden getting thrown down to the earth. He won the presidency, but then now we're gonna see him get thrown down, like, and actually lose his power. Okay. So two different type of fulfillments of that. Because actually I think the verses go on to talk about he's thrown down to earth, and then he, kind of persecutes God's people and stuff like that. And then it says, okay, "Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night." And so definitely Christians are accused, by the left, of being, Christians and conservatives are being accused of being racist, homophobes, misogynists, things like that. "And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death." Now, that's really important, because I don't believe that Trump's followers are going to be overcomers, because they do love their life. Okay, and so even when faced with death, they're not they're not going to submit to death, they're going to rise up in civil war. And I don't believe that's what God's calling us to do. And so will Christians will be overcomers because of the blood of the Lamb, that we're putting our faith in Jesus, and God to take care of us, okay, rather than in, some, false political Messiah type person. Okay, and so one of the things I wanted to mention related to this war in heaven concept is, so I'm going to read to you about dominion theology. Okay, so dominionism, or Christian dominionism, is a term coined by social scientists and popularized by journalists to refer to a subset of American Christianity that is conservative, politically active, and believes that Christians should and eventually will take control of the government. The term is sometimes used as a catch-all by bloggers to describe any politically active Christian, but not every conservative, politically minded Christian is a dominionist. Okay, so I believe a lot of the Trump followers are dominionists. Okay, Christian dominionists believe that God desires Christians to rise to power through civil systems so that his word might then govern the nation. The belief that America as a Christian nation is sometimes called soft dominionism, the idea that God wants only Christians to hold government office and run the country according to biblical law, is called hard dominionism. Okay, that's, wanting everybody in government office to be Christians. In hard dominionism. Dominion theology's beliefs are based on Genesis 1:28, which says, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." This verse is taken by Christian dominionists as a divine mandate to claim dominion over the earth physically, spiritually, and politically. Okay, however, dominion theology goes even further with this verse, leading to two other philosophies: Christian Reconstructionism and Kingdom Now theology. So I'm skipping to where it talks about Kingdom Now theology is most popular among charismatic and Pentecostal groups, focuses on taking dominion of the earth by way of spiritual battle. Kingdom Now adherents believe that long ago Satan stole the keys of spiritual dominion when he deceived Adam and Eve. Now, when Christ gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter in Matthew 16:19, it was a sign that dominion had been returned to man. Now it is our job to take back what is rightfully ours, that is to claim dominion over the earth and to spiritually subdue it for Christ. Proponents of Kingdom Now theology believe that the capturing of this dominion includes having Christians in political office, plus a return of spiritual power manifested by signs, miracles, and healing. Okay, so this article actually goes on to talk about how this belief system is unbiblical, and I think it might go into detail about it. And because bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth is not our commission. Christian dominionism seeks to perfect the world by political clout, but it is the Spirit who must bring change. One day, Jesus will bring his kingdom to earth in justice and true righteousness, and it will signify the end of this world system. Okay, so that I actually got that from www.gotquestions.org, christiandominionism.html, and so if you want to, it goes into more detail, and so if you want to read more about that, I highly recommend it. It's a well-written article, and it's not too much longer than what I got here. So an important question you need to ask yourself is, who brings the kingdom? Okay, who does the work? Okay, so what I believe is that it's really about God saving me or saving us, not me saving myself or not us saving ourselves. Okay. If you don't believe this, you got to read the Psalms. Okay, search, save me, and read all the Psalms where it talks about God saving us. Okay, it's God that's going to be doing the work to save his people. Okay. um and and so that's very important theology, to understand that it's God that does the work, who brings the messianic kingdom. Okay. And so it was interesting when I was reading this. So it said, kingdom now adherents believed that long ago Satan stole the keys of spiritual dominion when he deceived Adam and Eve. So it's kind of interesting because you could see kind of a twisting of that story into Trump's lies about the election being stolen by Biden. Okay, so um, you could see how it's kind of mixed in. Um, if you believe that Satan stole the keys, of spiritual dominion, then it's probably not too far of a step to believe that Biden stole the election. Okay. Um, and so then, um, and so we have, so it's kind of interesting because we have, a group of people that have kind of been raised on charismatic and Pentecostal theology, which is inaccurate. There's a lot of flaws in it. And then, so what was really interesting too was that a lot of the prophets, that I saw on YouTube that were, promoting, well, first of all, saying that Trump was going to win the election, and then, now saying that Trump's going to be coming back. A lot of them are connected to Kenneth Copeland, who's definitely a Pentecost. Okay, a Pentecostal guy. So a lot of so they're so they were raised on this false theology. Okay. And and there's some other false theology that kind of comes in with the charismatics and the Pentecost. So definitely kind of interesting how this is kind of culminated into what's happening now in this country, and especially because now what we're seeing is that these people are really looking to Trump to help them gain spiritual dominion over the United States. Okay. So they're all set to do the work to try to bring you know bring God's kingdom to America. Okay. And so that's what makes them dangerous, because they're operating on false theology, and and they don't understand, and they're willing to fight and be destructive, like we saw on January 6th, to make this happen. And so they're dangerous. Okay. um uh, and so I wanted to bring that up. Okay. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up was I saw in Acts 1, 9-11, is that I think this might be a prophecy about the return of Trump, that he's going to return the same way that he left. I mean, a lot of times with prophecy, I think there's dual fulfillments. I definitely think, Jesus, I mean, obviously the literal meaning of the verse is about Jesus is going to come back in the same way that, he left. But I think this could also be a prophecy about Trump's return. And so I thought it was interesting because it's Acts 1, 9-11. So I highlighted that 9-11. Okay. Because I think that's significant. And I'll talk about what I believe the meaning of 9/11 is in another slide. Okay. And then it says, after he had said these things, he was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud received him out of their sight. As they were gazing intently into the sky while he was going, behold, 2 men in white clothing stood beside them. They also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus who had been taken up from you into heaven will come in just the way as you have watched him go into heaven. Okay, so put quotes around this Jesus, quote unquote, because they're making Trump to be kind of a Jesus type figure, a Messiah type figure. He will come back in just the same way. And so what we saw was that January 6th was, after the election, 2021 was his downfall. Okay. That's when he started losing power. That's when, his own followers, just said, okay, this guy's nuts. We need to, you know, move on from him. Although he does have his diehard followers. Okay. And so what I believe is that he's going to return with another type of January 6th, type incident. Okay. We're going to see another attempt of these people to try an insurrection, to overthrow Biden's government. Okay. Okay. And so what's interesting is I'm starting to see now with these January 6 hearings is that I think the January 6 hearings are in prophecy. Okay. And so let me talk about, so in Esther 3, it says, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Okay, so that was when Biden was promoted, okay, to be president. Okay, God allowed. So I believe King Ahasuerus could be a picture of God at times, okay, in prophecy. And so he allowed Biden to be promoted. And I talked about this, he allowed Biden to win the election because he's allowing Obama and Biden to let their sin become full. Okay. And then it says, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. Well, so what's interesting is if the king is a picture of God, God has commanded that we are to obey our leaders. Okay. But then it says Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. So we have Trump and his followers don't acknowledge that Biden is president. Okay, that he's the rightful president of this country. I mean, yeah, he's evil and wicked. But God didn't say in his word, we'll only follow the rulers that are, only submit to the leaders that are righteous. We're supposed to submit as much as possible without transgressing God's law. We're supposed to follow, our leaders. Okay. But Trump's people are not, they're not acknowledging at all that he's even the rightful president. Okay. That Biden's the rightful president. Okay. And then it says, the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? Okay, so it's kind of interesting because we see that word why, and then it talks about being at the king's gate. Okay, so the servants at the king's gate could be a picture of the people in the House and the Senate. Okay, and so it could be a picture of this January 6th commission, which is made up of representatives. Okay, and it was put together to try to understand how January 6th could happen, okay, to understand why, okay, January 6th happened, okay. So it's interesting because I think we see this prophecy here in Esther 3, and we see it in Esther 4 too, okay. And so it said, now it was when they had spoken daily to him, and he would not listen to him, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So we have Trump saying that he's a Christian, and a Republican, and so that's why he's not going to follow Biden. And then also just the whole thing where, he's kind of got delusions of grandeur and thinks he's called by God and, all that kind of stuff. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for he had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. And so we also see this concept in one of the stories of Daniel, where they were gonna kill all the wise men or prophets, including Daniel and his friends. Okay, so God's people end up being kind of caught up in this. I mean, definitely we know, like, with Obama's presidency, that there was a oppression of against Christianity. And so Biden's continuing that, and he's continuing, I mean, they just, he really just wants to bring down America. They want to bring down America, um, for kind of their global causes. Okay. And so God's people are, being oppressed, just as Trump's people are being oppressed too. Okay. Um, and then, okay, so then in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month of Dar. So I thought this was interesting because the 12th year would have been 2020, because you had 8 years of Obama's presidency, and then the fourth year of Trump's presidency. Okay. And so I thought it was interesting because I really see 2020 was the year of Trump's peace deals. And, so I really, like, I kind of see a connection with this Pur being connected to, like, the mark of the beast. Okay, the mark of the beast from the earth, is, I think there could be a shadow here about the mark. Okay. And so the mark, the Pur, was being cast from day to day and from month to month. And so in 2020, when Trump was putting together all his peace deals, people were getting the mark of the beast on them. And then, okay, so Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's law. So it's not in the king's interest to let him remain. Okay. So so we kind of saw this belief system in general among people on the left. Okay. Trying to get rid of conservatives or get rid of Christians. But we also see this in particular with the January 6th hearings, and just they were and just how they were arresting people on January 6th. I mean, that were there for January 6th, that they were actually kind of seeking them out to arrest them. Okay. And and maybe some of it was over the top. you know maybe not totally lawful, although I do believe that they broke the law on January 6th. And so some of them, well, a lot of them did break the law and needed to be arrested and stuff. But we live in a wicked day, and so the court cases might not have been as righteous as you would hope. And then the chapter goes on to talk about Haman paying silver, okay, which is a connection to how Judas, money was changing hands. Well, what we have with Judas, Haman was willing to pay silver. Judas was, remember, he was the money, he carried the money box. Okay. And so what we see is a picture of Biden, because he's willing to give America's money to leftist causes, their global world causes. I mean, he's willing to bankrupt America for his leftist global causes. Okay. And then it goes on, verse 11, the king said to Haman, the silver is yours, the people also to do with them as you please. So God allowed Biden and the left's evil to become full, to do whatever they wanted with America. Okay. And silver, I think is a picture of Christians. I think gold is a picture of Jews. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, each province according to his script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. So seeking out the January 6th people, I highlighted 13th day because I definitely think the number 13 connects to Obama and and Biden. And but what's also interesting is that I'm kind of looking at June 13th as a possible high watch date. Okay, and so what would be interesting about the 13th day of the first month is that if we see like Jesus return, even though it's June 13th, it would be considered like the first month of Jesus's return, or it's considered the first month of Trump's return. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, and so then letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Dar, and to seize their possessions and plunder. Okay, so now this is where we're getting into prophecies a little, it's a shadow right now. We can't really tell what's going to happen, but I'm wondering if what we're going to see is Trump's followers using social media, to say, okay, let's go kill and annihilate all of Biden's people. The 13th day of June. Like really what I'm wondering is if this second hearing of January 6th is going to prompt action on Trump followers. Okay. And so here's what I wrote. Trump assembling his people for war after the second January 6th hearing on June 13th. Okay, is that what this is a prophetic shadow of? Okay, so it just remains to be seen. We have to wait and see what happens. Okay, a copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples, which is really easy now with social media. You could send this all over the place with social media so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out and so they've already kind of been talking about this. If you kind of listen to the the quote unquote Trump prophets, people are already kind of been brainwashed to be prepared for this civil war. Okay. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. So the king and Haman sitting down to drink could be a picture of like Obama and Biden drinking the cup of wrath, because we see the cupbearer, when he returns to his office, he's going to be giving the king the cup, and a cup of wine is a picture of like the cup of judgment. Okay, so God's gonna allow Trump's people to God's gonna allow this civil war because it's his way of bringing judgment on. I mean, it's gonna be judgment against the people on the left, but it's also going to be judgment on the people on the right, because he who fights with the sword will die by the sword. Okay, and so Trump's people, when they go to civil war, they're going to end up getting killed. Okay. And then what I believe is at the time of the civil war that God is going to separate his people, okay, and put them in a Passover type protection, or a Sukkot type booth, or like in Sodom and Gomorrah, he's going to make our doorways the people in the Civil War won't be able to find our doorways. Okay, we're going to be protected. They're going to be blind to our doorways. Okay. And so God's going to protect us. Okay, and then it says the city of Susa was in confusion. Okay, so is that a picture of civil war in America? I don't know. It remains to be seen. Okay, and then I see a repeat kind of the story in Esther 4, because kind of how prophecy works is that, I mean, God repeats, okay, so these prophecies about the end times are just in scripture over and over and over again, and God says them in different ways with different stories, different events in scripture. And and sometimes he does, even when he's telling the story, it's not necessarily chronological. Like he kind of, I believe that sometimes when God's telling the story, he's sometimes in the middle of the story, skips back into the past in the story, or maybe jumps ahead into the future, in the story. So, that's what makes prophecy kind of difficult, in this day and age when we see in part. Okay. But, Messiah's going to come and, clarify it all to us. Okay. So, but in Esther 4, it says, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. Okay. So, what I think this could be a picture of is Trump mourning after losing the election. And then he went as far as the King's Gate. And then, so what we saw, so I thought that was interesting because we saw that Trump did not go to the Capitol the first time with all his peeps on January 6th. Okay. For no one was to enter the King's Gate clothed in sackcloth. So God, didn't allow Trump to enter the King's Gate at that time. He didn't, God didn't lead him by his spirit to enter the King's Gate, because, um, you know, it wasn't God's purposes at that time. Okay. And then in each and every province where the commanded decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Okay, definitely could be a picture of the great mourning of Trump's peeps because, okay, the decree of the king, remember how I said the king could be a picture of God? Okay. And so what we saw is that where, God's decree was he wanted Biden back in power. And, Trump's followers didn't like that. And so they, had great mourning. Okay. They fasted and wept and wailed, and laid on sackcloth and ashes. Okay. Because they weren't submitting to God's will. Okay. And then it says Esther maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. So that could be a picture of the labor pains that we've been going through during this time of Biden being in power. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. So I thought that was interesting because the scriptures talk about being clothed with Messiah. Okay. And so we read about the cupbearer that he did not remember Joseph. Okay. So, so what we have is Trump is not clothed with Messiah. Okay. And that, he's not listening to, any possible Christians that might be, trying to tell him about Jesus. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so going on, then Esther summoned Hatak. So it's interesting because for the longest time I'm like, who is this Hatak person? I could not figure out who this was. Okay, until the January 6th hearings. It's like, oh man. Okay, so Liz Cheney, I think Liz Cheney is Hatak. Okay, because let's read about Hatak. Hatak was one of the king's eunuchs. Okay, whom the king had appointed to attend Esther, okay, and ordered Hatak to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Okay, there's that why, okay? So, the reason why Liz Cheney would be considered a eunuch would be that they took away Liz's power, okay? The Trump followers they weren't happy with the fact that Liz was not willing to accept the lies that Trump was saying about the election being stolen, and that she's actually speaking out against Trump's lies, and was willing to be on this commission. And so they took away some of her power that she had. Okay. She had a leadership position that they took away from her. And then okay, and so um and so she was going to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Okay, she was trying to understand what happened on January 6th. Okay, why were these people willing to riot at the Capitol? Why were they willing to overthrow the government? um and so that's kind of what's going on with the January 6th hearings. Okay. So Hatak went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Okay, so that could be a picture of. So I thought it was interesting that you have the city square because the TV is like square, okay, in front of the king's gate. So what we saw is the first January 6th hearing was on June 9th on primetime television. Okay, so in front where everyone, at the king's gate, or the city square, it's really where business was conducted. Okay. So just kind of, the January 6th hearing is out in the open for all to see. Okay. And then Mordecai told them all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. And so this is, where prophecy, where sometimes the characters change. And so now Mordecai here, instead of being Trump, could be any of the witnesses of January 6th, going and telling the truth in these hearings of what happened, leading up to January 6th. And then he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther an informer and to order her to go into the king to employ his favor and to plead with him for her people. So this could be, then we could be doing a shift back to Trump, where Trump is, going to maybe be texting, using social media to say, look, they're gonna try to destroy me. And so then he's calling on his people. Esther could be a picture of his followers, ordering them to go, talking about ordering them to go into the king. Okay. And so we go on to read about Esther goes into the king on the third day. Okay. Even though she doesn't have the golden scepter, even though she doesn't have permission. Okay, so that could definitely be a picture. Esther could definitely be a picture of Trump's followers, that they don't have the permission to go into the inner sanctum of the king and, steal back the power. Okay, so then Trump showing how the January 6th commission is being used, or the January 6th hearings is being used to bring him down. Is that what this is versus showing? So, I mean, we already saw there was an article on June 12th about, how they are, wanting to bring charges against Trump for what he did. Okay, and so then I highlighted Esther 4, 9-11. Okay. So then Hatak came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants. Okay, so then I think we're kind of backtracking a little bit in time again. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. So I talked about 30 days being the time of Biden. So Hattak coming back and relating Mordecai's words to Esther could be Liz Cheney on the second day of the January 6th hearings, which is June 13th. Okay, then Esther spoke to Hattak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. Okay, so, I don't know who this Esther picture person is, who Esther now is representing here, but Esther is kind of speaking like prophetical truth, saying that all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter. So Esther is kind of speaking prophecy, saying that God's people know you have to follow God's laws, okay? And God says follow authority, okay? And if you don't follow God's law, you're going to be put to death unless, God holds out to you the golden scepter, and the golden scepter would be a picture of Messiah, okay? And so I wrote, unless you know Messiah, you will be put to death for trampling God's courts, okay? So if you understand that America is God's country and you don't want to be trampling God's courts, in this country, then your sentence will be death unless you know the Messiah, okay? And then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So if Mordecai here is Trump saying to his followers, who knows whether you not attain royalty for such a time as this. This could be a picture of Trump and his followers having delusions of grandeur, saying, okay, we've been called by God to take back the government, Christian dominionism, kingdom now belief, and so that, so these delusions of grandeur that they have, or delusions of being called by God is dangerous, okay? And then it says, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to law. And if I perish, I perish. So, so whenever I see this word assemble, I think of in Revelation where it talks about the 3 frogs going out to assemble everybody for the great war, and so I think of that. And then 3 days night or day could be the picture of like 3 days day is the time of Obama, 3 days night is the time of Biden, because it's 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, okay, belly of the whale. And remember I said Obama's the belly of the statue or the belly of the whale. The belly's connected to Obama. So then we have Esther saying, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Okay, so, that's a picture of Trump's people, like, they're willing to sacrifice their life, for their religious cause, okay, because they're deluded. They're under this deluding influence that came upon the Trump followers during 2020 when Trump was doing all his peace deals and stuff. And so they have these delusions of grandeur. They think they're called by God. So they're willing to sacrifice the life for their cause, which is based on false theology. And so that's similar to Samson saying, let me die with the Philistines, okay? And Samson ends up pulling down the pillars, pushing down the pillars on the right and the pillars on the left. Okay, so Trump's gonna, they're gonna rise up. The right is gonna rise up to try to pull down the left, but they end up being pulled down too. Okay. I talked about morning and evening sacrifices. Morning sacrifices would be World War II, and the people who died in the people who died in World War II and the people who died in the Holocaust would be like the morning sacrifices, and then 70 some years later we have the evening sacrifices, which the morning and evening sacrifices were necessary for the establishing of God's altar, or temple. And so the evening sacrifices, I'm wondering if those are the people who died from COVID. So far, we're over the 1 million mark in America, and then we've had people dying in the war in Ukraine. So I think we're seeing a fulfillment of those prophecies. And then in Exodus, we see first we saw the flax and the barley were ruined. I'm wondering if that connects to war in Israel in 2021. And then we were seeing wheat and spelt ruined. I wonder if that's connecting to war in Ukraine in 2022. Okay. So I definitely believe we're seeing prophecy being fulfilled. We just may not recognize that it's being fulfilled. Okay. What I'm wondering is if we're going to see a fulfillment of, like if we're going to see kind of this chiastic structure. And so at the beginning, so Trump made the deal of the century in January 2020. Okay, and then what we saw was on April, and so then we had COVID, was March 2020, and then what we saw was April 26 was when they started opening up the country, and we saw kind of like Trump followers protesting about the shutdowns. Okay, and that was like when they were wanting, like we saw in Michigan that they were going up against the governor there. And so that was like the Trump followers protesting and stuff. And then on May 26th was when the Black Lives Matter protests begun, so like, 30 days later, a month later. And so I'm wondering if those were connected to the fifth trumpet or the first woe, that the BLM protests were like the locusts, okay, connected to the fifth king is what I'm wondering. And then what I'm wondering is, okay, so now what we've seen on May 14th is we saw the abortion right activists protesting on May 14th, okay, which is kind of interesting and sad because that was that's the date of Israel's independence, okay. And then are we going to see 30 days later, June 13th or the 14th of 2022, Trump and his followers are rising, okay, in a type of protest, okay. Maybe a protest against, well, definitely maybe one of the things is like the gun rights, activists, but also these people that would be protesting against trying to bring down Trump. Okay, so is that connected to the sixth trumpet, the second woe, which would be the four angels that were bound at the Euphrates being released? Okay, so right now, so that could be a picture of the Euphrates, could be a picture of Biden, kind of binding, let's say that right, binding Trump followers, okay, and so then God's gonna allow them to be released, okay, and so I think what we see is 200 million mounted troops, horses and riders, okay, so not quite sure how that number's gonna work out, but we'll see what happens. That prophetic numbers, you kind of have to take them with a grain of salt because I think sometimes there's like shadows and hidden meanings in numbers. So we'll see how that works. Okay. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is the meaning of 9/11. Okay. And so we find this out in Psalm 119, verse 119. Okay. 911, 911 twice. Okay. And so remember that, like in European countries and Israel, they would write the date backward, like opposite of how we write it in America. So we say 9/11, but 11/9 is also a way to say the same date. Okay. And so we read in Psalm 119, you have removed all the wicked of the earth like dross. Therefore I love your testimonies. Okay. And so even in this one verse here too, you see, because one of the things that, if you recognize that Jesus is the Word, Psalm 119 is definitely like a big psalm about Jesus. Because it's talking about, God's Word and how great it is and stuff like that. And so, we kind of see, because what I think is that at the same time that God's going to remove the wicked of the earth, he's going to send his son, the living word. Okay. And so just in this one verse alone, we see that kind of that dual events, the dual events kind of listed, so. Okay, and then Revelation 17, it says, and the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. Okay, so the beast plus 10 horns equals 11. 11 is the number of judgment. It connects to Joseph's second dream, I think, is a picture of the return of Trump. Okay. So maybe Joseph's first dream is a picture of the first time that Trump was here. So then it talks about eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. That's is a connection to the fiery furnace that we read about in Daniel. Okay. So I definitely think the Civil War is connected to this fiery furnace story. Okay. And remember in the fiery furnace story that Daniel's 3 friends are protected from the fiery furnace. They don't get burned. Okay. And we see a messianic figure show up in the fiery furnace. Okay. Who, looks like a son of God. Okay. So one of the things about Passover is that the Jewish people clean out leavening before the holiday. And so God commands them to pick their Passover lamb on the 10th. So what I'm wondering is if we're going to see, okay, so we talked about the second Passover on the Jewish calendar last month in May, but we didn't really see like any prophetical fulfillments, of Passover on that date or connected to the date. I mean, there might be like some shadows of type things that happen on the second Passover. But what we're all wondering is if this month, so it'd be like Sivan, which is the third month on the Jew. If really the second Passover maybe happens on the third month in prophecy, like prophetically. And so Sivan 15th is actually June 14th. So is that when we're actually going to see the prophecies of the second Passover fulfilled? And so if that's true, then we want to pay attention to Sivan 10, because that's when the Passover lamb was supposed to be picked. And so that was when the January 6th hearing happened. Okay. And so I thought it was interesting because if you read about the Passover lamb, it says, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's households, a lamb for each household. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and then you keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails. So entrails would be like the middle, okay, the belly of the lamb. Okay, so this is what I'm wondering is that with this, so what we saw with this January 6th hearing is that people kind of already made up their mind. I mean, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people already kind of made up their mind before the hearing even happened. I mean, I heard Hugh Hewitt wasn't even willing to listen to it. Okay. And so what I think is that because of this hearing, people are picking their Passover lamb. And so is your lamb, so you could take your lamb from the sheep or from the goats. Okay, so is your Passover lamb going to be Jesus, or is it going to be Trump, or is it going to be Biden? Okay. And so kind of a big test would be the January 6th hearing. Are you, you know, uh, are you willing to believe the truth about um um that Trump did wrong on January 6th? Or are you gonna, be insistent that Trump is innocent, like his followers, and so what's interesting is, so with the Passover lamb, it gets killed at twilight on the 14th, okay, and then blood is put on the two doorposts and on the lintel, okay, so what I'm thinking is that what we're going to see is blood on the left and blood on the right, and then the lintel would be a picture of, Messiah and his blood on the lintel, okay? And then, because remember that God passes over the houses that have the Passover lamb's blood, so I'm, thinking what we're seeing is that, just, God's people, they're going to be passed over because they have their Passover lamb, which is Jesus, his blood on the lintel, the heavenly part of the door. And then, that's going to happen at the same time that we're going to see blood on the right and on the left. Okay. The people that lean politically right and the politically left. Okay. The two door pose, because remember I told you Samson knocks down the two pillars. Okay. Which, is 9/11. And then we see that it talks about roasted with fire, so definitely a connection to the fiery furnace. Okay. So definitely interesting. Okay. And then, okay, so I was thinking return to Trump 120 weeks, but what we're seeing for this time frame now, we're up to the 123rd and the 24th weeks. Okay. We see that Aaron dies at 123. Okay. So it's possible the evening of the 13th, June 13th, which is the last day, the 7th day of week 123, we could see, we read about the Passover lamb being killed at twilight on the 14th day. So June 14th is June 13th is Saban 14th. Okay, so if we're following Passover prophecies, we would see a Passover type lamb killed on Savan 14th at twilight or whatever, at night or whatever. And then, okay, so I talked about this in my last video about how Trump and Netanyahu are like Absalom, stealing the hearts away. Trump stealing the hearts away from Biden and Jesus. Netanyahu stealing the hearts away from Bennett and Jesus. Okay. Okay, I talked about that before. Okay, and then, okay, so then what's very interesting that people are kind of missing is that June 13th is the Orthodox Pentecost, okay? And so what I'm wondering is if we are supposed to start counting 50 days after the Orthodox Easter. So the Orthodox follow the Julian calendar, okay? And they kind of get ignored a lot in when relating to prophecy because people think they're not significant. But I think they are. And so their Pentecost is June 13th, okay? So it's possible that that could be considered the third Pentecost, because you had the Jewish people, have their Shavuot, which corresponded with the regular Pentecost, or Pentecost for the you know the regular I don't know how to say it, like non-Orthodox Christians had their Pentecost also on the same day, June 5th. Okay, so that would be two Pentecosts there, and then the Orthodox Pentecost would be the third Pentecost. Okay. And then, okay, so here's what I'm wondering. Leviticus 23, where God talks about counting the 50 days, it says, "You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath." What is the Sabbath? Sabbath is the Orthodox Easter, which is the sign of the Messiah that's talked about. Like Jesus says in Matthew 24, in the last days, we're going to see the sign of the Messiah. So was Easter, obviously, a big picture of Jesus in the Easter holiday. Okay. And so then do we start counting after, Easter Sunday? Okay. From the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. So you're counting 7 Sundays. Okay. Because the Sunday is the Sabbath for Christians. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord. You shall bring in from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread for a wave offering, made of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, baked with leaven, as first fruits to the Lord. Okay, so what happens is, so when you're counting the Omer, the 50 days, the grain offering that you're offering is barley, okay, for 50 days. And so barley could be a picture of Messiah's peeps, okay, being offered up, okay. And so what we really have seen is, in Israel, we've seen a rise of terrorist attacks, okay, definitely over these 50 days. And then we've seen, shootings and stuff in America. Okay, so definitely more and more of God's people being attacked during this time. Okay, so more of the evening sacrifice, people being added to the evening sacrifice. But then what happens is we see a reversal of fortunes on Pentecost. And so instead of barley being offered up, if barley is a picture of Messiah's followers, we see wheat being offered up. And what we're seeing is, we're actually seeing this bread offered up, which is baked with leavening. Okay, what's interesting, I think it's very interesting that, so 2 loaves are offered up on Pentecost, okay, baked with leavening. So that could either represent Trump and Netanyahu, the 2 witnesses, or it could represent Trump and Biden, like the leaders of the 2 sides, okay, the 2 pillars, right and left, okay. So definitely very interesting. So okay. So what we have is 2 banquets of Esther. The second one is when Haman is exposed. We have 2 visits to Joseph by his brothers. The second one is when Joseph is revealed. The rooster crows twice in the Gospels after Peter has denied Jesus 3 times. Okay, so 2 banquets and 2 roosters could mean a second 9/11 or a second January 6th, or a second January 6th hearing, which is what we're going to see on June 13th, or a second Passover. Okay, so so we'll see what happens. Okay, and then 2 banquets could also connect to 2 holidays. Okay, so what I've been seeing in the scripture is that there's kind of this shadow of 2 holidays happening at the same time. So we have Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread kind of happening at the same time. And so when God talks about the Passover, he talks about it happening on the 14th. Um, and then unleavened bread happens on the 15th. Um, and then, but what's interesting in the New Testament, we kind of, when they talk about Passover and unleavened bread, they're kind of talked about on the same day. So I think there's a prophetic shadow here about these two holidays. Okay. So the Passover is connected to, like the killing of the Passover lamb, um, which we read about. And then unleavened bread definitely can connect to God's people and definitely to the Messiah, that, leavening is connected to sin. Okay. Um, and so what I'm wondering is, which day will you rest, on the 14th or the 15th? Okay. So we read in Esther about how, so this was done on the 13th day of the month Adar. They fight on the 13th, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. So, are you resting on July 14th, which is Trump's birthday? Or are you resting on Sivan 15, which is the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Messiah is the unleavened bread. So, what's very interesting to me about June 14th is that it is a day that could be fulfilling this prophecy of 14th and the 15th happening on the same day. So, it's the 14th on the Gregorian calendar, but it's the 15th on the Jewish calendar. Okay. What was interesting in May was we saw on May 14th, we saw that was the Buffalo supermarket shooting where 10 people were killed. And May 15th, there was also, that was when a Taiwanese church in California had a shooting incident. Okay. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That might have been God giving us kind of a sign about the 14th and the 15th. Okay. Like a month ahead of time. Okay. And then, okay. And then in Genesis 40, it says, "Thus it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored this chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." Okay, so very interesting that June 14th is Trump's birthday. Okay, but it also could be, so we talked about like the third day could connect to, the third Pentecost. Okay, but the third day, remember, that connects to Jesus's resurrection. Okay, and so then it says he made a feast for all his servants. So sometimes when I read about the feast, I think it's a prophetical shadow of like a war. Okay. It connects to like the Israelites in the wilderness feasting on quail. Okay, that God gives them all that they want to eat. Okay, he fulfills their desires. They want meat. Okay, and so craving for meat could be a picture of people craving for blood. Okay, wanting vengeance. Okay, um, and then so it's interesting because then on Pharaoh's birthday, the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker were lifted up, but the chief baker got hung, but the chief cupbearer got restored. Okay. And so I'm wondering if the chief cupbearer is Trump and the baker is Biden. Okay. Because we see with the baker, he's got 3 baskets of bread, and the birds are eating the bread in the third basket. Okay. And so that could be a picture of like, during the time of Biden's presidency, the third day also could connect to, Biden's term in office, because we got Obama is the first day, Trump is the second day, and Biden is the third day. And so the 3 baskets connect to the 3 days. And so we see the birds eating the bread on the third day. And so, I talked about that could be a prophetic shadow of the war in Ukraine. Um, um, but it also could be a picture of civil war happening. Okay. Um, and then, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, so a picture about how Trump forgot Jesus. Okay. Um, and, basically tries to step into Jesus's shoes. Um, okay. And then we also read about this birthday story in Mark. It says a strategic day came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his lords and military commanders and the leading men in Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. And he swore to her, whatever you ask of me, I will give it to you, up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. Immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And although the king was very sorry, yet because of his oaths and because of his dinner guests, he was unwilling to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded him to bring back his head. And he went and had him beheaded in the prison. Okay, so so this is there, there's some prophetic shadows that I'm not totally sure about this. And so sometimes I think Herod could be a picture of Trump, because it says Herod on his birthday gave a banquet, which could be Trump, on his birthday, causing this feasting to happen. And then the daughter of Herodias dancing, could be a picture of like the harlot of Babylon. And then Herod, says to the girl, what do you want? I'll give it to you, so that could be Trump making promises to America, his followers saying, what do you want? And then they're saying, well, we want the head of, and so I don't know who she went out and said to her mother. I don't know who the mother would be. What shall I ask for? I have to think about this. There could be a connection to like Ruth and Naomi, maybe, in this story. Have to think about who the mother would be. And so she's supposed to ask for the head of John the Baptist. And then immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And so immediately the king sets an executioner and commanded him to bring back his head, and he went and had him beheaded in the prison. So being beheaded could be a picture of losing, political power. And that connects to the baker being hung. But I also could, read this opposite, where Herod could be Biden, and then the head of John the Baptist could be people asking for the head of Trump. Okay. And so I do kind of see that's already kind of happening with these hearings, is that we're having people asking for the head of Trump. Um, but remember too that Haman builds a gallows for Mordecai, but then Haman ends up being hung on the very gallows that he sets up. And so actually this could be, so now that I think about this, could be, Biden's people talking about wanting the head of Trump, but then they end up being hung on the very gallows. I mean, basically, they're asking for Trump's head, which ends up sparking the Civil War. Okay. Anyways, but this also reminds me of, what they were getting ready to crucify Jesus, and Pilate asked, who do you want released, Barabbas or Jesus? And they, release Barabbas, who is the one who caused an insurrection. Okay. So that could be a picture of the cupbearer being released, the insurrectionist. Okay. Um, so we'll have to see how this gets fulfilled. Okay. Um, and I don't know the timing of it. Like I said, some of the fulfillment of this asking for the head of John the Baptist could be a picture of these January 6th hearings. Okay. But then um the person being beheaded, we don't know the timing of that. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so key dates, so I said that after the deal of the century, there was important things that happened on various dates. So especially 120 days after the deal of the century was the start of the BLM riots. Okay. 7 weeks after the deal of the century was when we had the 50th state with COVID. Okay. So I kind of think there might be a chiastic structure that ends up being built with, the end, the last days are going to maybe correspond with what happened, right after the deal of the century. But we won't really know till everything gets played out and we chart it all out. And then 426 was 12 weeks after the deal of the century. And then so I got the list here of Trump's 6 quote unquote peace deals. 70th week after the deal of the century was when Netanyahu got voted out. And that same week too was when Trump got kicked off of Facebook and Instagram. Let's see. Okay, and then 40 weeks after the deal of the century was when Biden was declared the winner. 62 days after 11/7 was January 7th, which, by the way, was Orthodox Christmas. So maybe that's why we want to pay attention to Orthodox Pentecost. But the Orthodox Christmas was when the Electoral College vote actually happened. It was a day later. It would have been 61 days, ended up being 62 days. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. 120 days after the peace signings on 9/15 was Trump's second impeachment vote, which was the 50th week. Okay, so, we see kind of a connection with, people are so what's interesting too is people are calling these January 6th hearings like the third impeachment of Trump. Okay, so kind of interesting. And so 8/13/2020 to 2/8/2021 is 180 days, which connects to the 180-day banquet in Esther 1, and then 2/9 to 2/13 was Trump's second impeachment trial. So what happened on August 13th? That was the peace deal with UAE. Okay. So there was 180 days of Trump doing his peace deals. Okay. To February 8th. Up to his second impeachment trial. Okay. So things are being fulfilled. Okay. What we saw is that 70 weeks plus 50 weeks equals 120 weeks. I already talked about this. May 17th being the Republican primary in Pennsylvania. I already kind of saw a shadow of the number 50, in 120. June 5th was Shavuot. It was also the 6-day war anniversary. June 6th was 666, so it's 66, and then you add 2022 adds up to 6. What was interesting on that date was the Proud Boys. So 5 of them were charged with sedition for January 6th. So yeah. So my spell check always wants to turn 1/6 into a fraction. And then what was interesting too is June 6th was Shavuot day 2. on the Jewish calendar. So definitely could be, a prophetic shadow of this third Pentecost kind of thing, day 1 and day 2 being significant dates. June 9th was the first January 6th hearing. Okay, I already talked about that. Pick your Passover lamb. We see in scripture that day 3 is important. Esther went to the king on day 3. Jesus was resurrected on day 3. Moses said, be ready for the third day. The third day could be the third Pentecost. The third day is the time, I already said this third day is the time of Biden. You got Obama, Trump, Biden. Obama being the first day, Trump the second day, Biden the third day. A third day could be the third January 6th hearing. So if so, then things might not happen until the 15th, which then all my stuff that I discovered about the 13th and the 14th would, it could still be significant. So anyways, so it remains to be seen. We see in scripture that this time frame of 1335 days, the time, half a time, and then 3.5 days, we are looking for a 5. And so that's why Pentecost is really kind of a high watch day. Okay. And so what I believe is that the 1 of 1335 is the time of Trump, the 3 and the 3 is the time of Obama and the time of Biden, and then the 5 is the return of Trump. Okay, so that's why we can expect a return of Trump on a Pentecost type day. But I guess it could be a 52 or a 53 day. Maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be on day 50. I'm not really sure. So, but we see in Numbers 8:25 the Levites retire at 50. Okay. And so I see that kind of a prophetic shadow of God's people are going to retire from their suffering on a day, a 50 day. Okay. So June 13th is Orthodox Pentecost. It's the 7th day of the week 123. Okay, so I picked out, so significance of June 13th. If we have Daniel mourning for 21 days, June 13th is the 21st day after the school shooting in America. It was 1 year after Netanyahu was voted out. Orthodox Pentecost on this day. It's the 30th day since the lunar eclipse. Okay, so I wrote inclusive, so that's if you're counting the day of the lunar eclipse, including both dates. And then it's also Trump is on June 13th. He's 9-11 months old and 30 days. That's not inclusive. That would be not counting either the day of his birth or June 13th. So it just depends how you count them. Whether you include both dates in your count or if you just either count the first day or count the last day in your count. Okay. June 13th is 6 months, 24 days from Biden's birthday. That connects to Haggai 1:15. It's 1 year after Biden met with George Floyd family. That's connected to the Hebrew date. Sivan 14th is the Hebrew date. Like I said, killed the Passover lamb at twilight. It's the day of the second January 6th hearing in the morning. It's the third day of 6/11. Okay, so it's 3 days after 6/11, which was the 1 year anniversary of the man being swallowed by a whale. He was swallowed and spit up by a whale last year on June 11th. Okay, it's 40 weeks from Rosh Hashanah, which is also 9 months and 7 days. And so I was kind of wondering, because I was watching Back to the Future, because we saw kind of the 9/11 signs. We see the 1335 signs. So I was trying to see if there was any connection to June 13th or June 14th, kind of in Back to the Future movies. And, I was about to give up saying I don't see anything. But then when I wrote this about Rosh Hashanah being 9 months, 7 days, in Back to the Future 3, Marty, that's the date that Marty ends up going back to the future, was on Monday, September 7th. Okay. Um so could be a connection to June 13th. Okay. Um so not as like clear as 9/11 was, seemed to be a lot clearer. Of course, we didn't notice 9/11 until after 9/11 happened. So, you know, um and then on June 13th is 45 days from the partial solar eclipse. And so I talked about that on another slide. It's the 8th day after Shavuot. Um, so, I mean, the 8 days also is significant, because are we going to see the return of the eighth king on the 8th day? On an 8th day, okay? Um, so June 14th is Trump's 76th birthday. So that's when he turns to be 912 months old. Okay. What's interesting is that for his birthday, it also matches up with the Hebrew date of his birthday, which doesn't always happen a lot. Okay. Usually the anniversary of your regular birthday on the Gregorian calendar would be different than the anniversary on the Hebrew calendar. What I thought was interesting about 76 is that there's that song 76 Trombones in the Big Parade. Okay. We see Trump kind of connected to trumpets, I mean, loud instruments. Okay. June 14th is a Tuesday, which is the third day of the week. It's 9 months, 24 days from 8/21/21, which is that the solar eclipse? I think that was the solar eclipse. But that's not inclusive. But that the 9 months, 24 days, we find that in Haggai too. Okay, that time frame. Which also connects to Hanukkah too, by the way. 9 months, 24. So it's Flag Day. It's the start of week 124. It's Judah's birthday on the Hebrew calendar. It's 1 year after the blood moon on the Hebrew calendar. In 1940, on June 14th, that's when Auschwitz opened with the Polish POWs. Okay, I think that's when Germany invaded Poland on that date. 1942, Anne Frank began her diary on June 14th. In 1989, Ronald Reagan was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. Okay, so interesting because we see a lot about Ronald Reagan in the Back to the Future movies. So I kind of think he's the first king. So just interesting that he was knighted on June 14th. Okay. In 1990, in the movie Mr. Destiny, okay, the events happen on June 14th, okay, which is his 35th birthday, which connects to the 1335. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if the lead character, Jim, what's his name? If he's Mr. Destiny or if like the angel is Mr. Destiny. I'm not really sure who Mr. Destiny is supposed to be, but what's interesting is the lead character has an encounter with an angel named Mike. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. So are we going to see the return of a Michael type figure on June 14th? Okay. In 2017, a Bernie supporter opened fire at the Republican baseball practice. 4 were injured. In 1811, going back in time, Harriet Beecher Stowe was born on June 14th, and she was the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the reason why that's significant is that a lot of people think her book was kind of a key factor in the Civil War, the first Civil War in America. So definitely an interesting connection. Okay. And then I got this information from the YouTube channel, The Great Day of the Lord is Near. I might try to post that video on my website. They pointed out about how the solar eclipse was on April 30th, and then like 15 days later you had the blood moon, and then 15 days later you had the Tau, Hercules, meteor shower. And so each of them are like separated by 15 days. And then so 15 days after May 30th gets us to June 14th. Okay, I think the guy that the great day of the Lord is near brought us to June 13th. But if you actually do the numbers, it takes us to June 14th. But and so actually, okay, so 4:30 to 6:13 is 45 days inclusive. Okay, so that's if you're counting April 30th and you're counting 6:13, okay, which is Orthodox Pentecost. But if you're not counting one of those dates, then the 45th day would be June 14th, which is very significant because I put an explanation point because that's Trump's birthday. Okay, remember Trump is the 45th president, so could be a sign. Okay, so he connects all this to Matthew 24, which I think that's correct. Okay, because it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. That happened on the solar eclipse on April 30th. The moon will not give its light. That connects to the blood moon on May 15th. And the stars will fall from the sky. That connects to the meteor shower on May 30th. And the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. I was going to look this up really quickly. So Orthodox Easter was April 24th, so it actually happened before before those 3 dates. Okay, because I wondered if that was kind of a prophetic fulfillment of the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky, but also a fulfillment of the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky could be like a prophetic picture of the January 6 hearings. Okay, and then it says all the tribes of the earth will mourn. That could be a picture of, so Trump's followers are mourning because they're kind of going after Trump. Okay. And then it says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky. Oh, I didn't talk about this, but I connect clouds to kind of the diluting influence on Trump's followers. Okay. And so like Jesus ends up riding on the clouds. Okay, so I think he's above this diluting influence. Okay, he's not caught in the middle of this diluting influence. Okay. And then, but what's interesting too is that the Israelites, so the cloud gets lifted and then they move on when the cloud gets lifted. So the cloud could also be a picture of, how it talks about the restrainer will restrain until he is, out of the way. Okay. So, Biden's going to restrain Trump until God, says, okay, you're done restraining Trump. Until God's gonna allow Trump to return. Okay. And I really think Trump's time, his return, I think is gonna be really short. I think it could be 3.5 days at the most, maybe even shorter. So, but I think we're gonna see the Messiah return at the same time. Because the eighth king, it says, is also an eighth king, and so are we going to see two kings kind of show up on the eighth day, or two kings being considered the eighth king, Messiah and Trump. Okay, so here's Back to the Future. We see the 9/11 clue about the Twin Pines Mall that turns into the Lone Pine Mall. we in the movie you see 115 changes to 116. And so is that connected to the lunar eclipse that went from May 15th to May 16th? Okay. Because the lunar eclipse happened on week 119, so 9/11, days 6 and 7. Okay. So then what's interesting, okay, is that, well, first we see the Twin Pines Mall changes to the Lone Pine Mall. So one of the pillars falls and one of the pillars remains. The cupbearer, the baker falls, the cupbearer remains. But then we see this connection to when Marty returns, it's 1335. Okay. And so Marty is the 5. Okay. And it's interesting too when you watch Back to the Future 3, there's so many 5s. I mean, 5s are just everywhere. Okay, Doc Brown is a 5, Marty's a 5, Claire's a 5. So so I wrote out here 1335, 1 time of Trump, 3 time of Obama, 3 time of Biden, 5 return of Trump. Okay, is what I'm wondering. So, and then what's interesting too is that, so originally, when Marty goes to the mall, it's 1:16 in the morning. Okay. And so this event happens, and then we see the repeat of the event when he returns after being in the past, and then he returns to the future. And so the event happens again, but with slightly different outcome. Okay. I mean, the second time, Doc gets killed the first time, but the second time Doc lives. Okay. So that, could be a connection to the 2 January 6th. Okay. Or the 2 9/11 type events. Okay. And then, but we got to remember how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. But as for you, Daniel, go your way to the end. Okay. Don't get stuck on 1 through 5 with Trump. Okay. You want to go your way to the end with Messiah. Okay. And then we will enter into rest. Okay. Also in Back to the Future is this 9/11 sign where 9 is the heavenly. We see the 9 on the Western Auto. And then the 11's on the ground, the earthly, like the 2 towers on the ground, burning on the ground. And then what I think is interesting is that the fire kind of makes this H picture, which could connect to Hanukkah. Because what I think is significant about Hanukkah is that it's an 8-day holiday. And so what it's a picture of is that Messiah survives through the 8 kings. Okay, that he's the light that shines through the 8 kings. Okay. What's very interesting is the Trump Tower fire was on the 50th floor. Okay. So we see fire being connected to 50. Okay. So are we going to see a fire connected to Trump on 50 Pentecost? We'll see. Okay. And then, and so I listed Acts 2 here, but I'm kind of having a hard time kind of figuring out the prophetic shadows in Act 2. But one of the significance about Acts 2 is it's Pentecost. Okay. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. Okay. All together in one place could be a prophetic shadow of the second January 6th hearing. And then it says, and suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind. Okay. So what I don't know is how soon after the second January 6th hearing are we going to see this violent rushing wind? Okay. We read in the story of the flood of Noah that wind stops the flood of Noah. Okay. So remember that the flood connects to the beast from the sea. Okay. Or the dragon pours water like a flood. Okay. But the earth swallows the flood. Okay, so the earth connects to Trump is the beast from the earth. Okay. And then it says, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. The wind fills the whole house. Okay. So is that Trump's people filling, America? And then it says, and there appeared to them tongues as of fire. So that connects to the fiery furnace, distributing themselves. Oh, it's interesting because the fiery furnace is in Daniel 3, and this is verse 3. And they rested on each of them. And they were, okay, and then it says, so now I'm thinking we're switching to Jesus's people when it says they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, actually, I think this is still connected to Trump's followers, because it says they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterance. So I think that's a connection to the Tower of Babel, where God says we're going to go down and confuse their language. So the Holy Spirit is going to come down and confuse the language of the Trump followers. Okay. Because the reason why they're able to do so much harm is they all speak the same language. So they're building the city and the tower because they all speak the same way. They all believe the same conspiracy theories. And so for God to put an end to them, he needs to confuse their language. Okay. And that also kind of connects to they can't find the door. Okay. For, when Sodom and Gomorrah are being judged. Okay. Okay. So now verse 5, this, I think is where we're talking about Jesus's followers, because then it says, now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. So devout, Jesus's followers are the devout ones. And when this sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. They were amazed and astonished, saying, why are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear them in our own language to which we were born? And then it lists a bunch of different languages, including in verse 11, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them in our own tongue speaking of the mighty deeds of God. So I'm not totally sure the prophetic fulfillment of these verses, except that it could be God, Messiah's people kind of being astonished about, like, okay, when it says why are not all these who are speaking Galileans, like, okay, well, why is Trump followers like starting the civil war in America? Aren't they Americans? Okay, so that could connect to that. And they all continued in amazement and great perplexity, saying, what does this mean? Well, that could connect to the January 6th hearings. What do they mean? Oh, yes, so maybe, this, like, once again, backing up a little bit in history, talking about the January 6th event, the first event. And then it says, but others were mocking and saying they are full of sweet wine. So, maybe people making fun of Trump followers saying they're drunk. The left saying they're drunk. Okay. But we read in Amos 9 that sweet wine connects to, okay, behold, days are coming when the plowman will overtake the reaper and the treader of grapes, him who sows seed, when the mountains will drip sweet wine and all the hills will be dissolved. Okay, so we see sweet wine connecting to a treader of grapes and hills being dissolved. Okay, so it could be a civil war picture. And then we have Peter taking his stand with the 11. What's interesting in the story of Jacob, we see that he took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Okay, that could be a picture of the Israelites plundering the Egyptians. Okay, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. So here Jacob could be Biden being left alone, and a man wrestling with him until daybreak could be Trump wrestling with Biden, or Trump's followers wrestling with Biden's followers. And then when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated. while he wrestled with him. So I definitely think, like, Obama's the belly, but Trump's the thigh. I mean, not Trump, Biden's the thigh. Okay, because it's a belly and thighs of brass, bronze or whatever. Um, and so then, so then Peter, taking a stand with the 11, raised his voice and declared to the men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, "Let this be known to you, and give heed to my words. For these men are not drunk as you suppose, for it is the third hour of the day." Um, third hour of the day could connect to the time of Biden, the third king, Obama, Trump, Biden. Um, and then I didn't go on with the rest of the chapter. Because, like I said, I was kind of having trouble knowing the prophetic fulfillment. But it goes on where Peter, ends up kind of giving a speech. Okay. And he brings in the Joel verses about the last days. Okay. So there Peter could be a picture of the Messiah, kind of bringing in, explaining to people what's going on with the word of God. Okay. So you don't want to be part of the sea of Obama and Biden. You don't want to be part of the sea of Trump. Even though it might not be totally accurate to call it the sea of Trump, because the water is connected to Obama and Biden, and then Trump is the earth. But we want to be on the dry land with Messiah in the middle. When the sea gets divided, when the Civil War gets started, America divides, we want to be in the middle with Messiah. And we want to stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Let God do the work. Okay. And, so if we see a burning on the right and a burning on the left, we're out of time. And then we're going to see Messiah, who's kind of not connected to time, in the middle. Okay. Just like the parting of the Red Sea. Okay. So that's my video, the third day in week 123. We'll have to see how it all plays out. So could be significant dates, the 13th and the 14th. But then if, it doesn't happen, I'll have to reevaluate and see kind of how I missed it. Okay, because remember, we see in part and we prophesy in part, and I call myself the partial prophet because I'm not really sure. But I wanted to get this information out to you because I think it's, we're already seeing the fulfillment of prophecy with the January 6th commission on the 13th. Okay. But when the January 6th commission is going to spark the Civil War, I'm not sure about that. It remains to be seen. And then the other thing that's possible is, we could be starting a Passover type shadow on June 14th, which is Sivan 15th, but then it would go through the 21st, and then we'd see an 8-day like fulfillment on June 21st, which is Sivan 22nd. Okay. So that would be like the 8th day of the second Passover, which would be week 125. So, I don't know if like 125 is more significant than week 124 or week 123. I'm not sure about that. So, I'll have to take a look for that. We'll see what happens, and then if I have to do an update, and we'll do an update. The Lord willing. So thanks for listening. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you're encouraged and you see that we are approaching the last days, and that we should be looking up for our redemption draws near. And so it's just a matter of gotta be, if it not days or hours at this point, definitely within weeks. So so hang in there. So I know it's difficult, but hang in there, because your redemption draws nigh. And just I pray for God's grace for you, to give you the grace to make it through. And thank you so much for tuning into my channel, and just God bless. I know it's hard, but persevere endure until the end. And then when Jesus comes, it'll be like we were dreaming. Okay. You know, cause just all the miracles that are going to come with Jesus. So hang in there. Thanks so much for tuning in. God bless.